Today we discover the danger of having a presumptuous spirit. Today is day 60. We're reading from Numbers 14 and 50 along with Psalm 70. The people begin complaining and they're looking back. They refuse to trust and to obey God. They revert to a victim mentality and they begin whining and crying and belly aching to God. They want to go back to Egypt. They fantasized it. They want a new leader. They become rebellious. So Joshua and Caleb challenged the people to reconsider. Don't rebel was their appeal. Don't fear. Those two words, rebellion and fear, were the very foundation of the challenge of these people. People now want to stone even Caleb and Jacob, and they are in a spirit of rebellion. Going back to Egypt becomes a metaphor in the scriptures for doubting and turning away from God. Our Egypt is coming out of the world and then considering of going back to the world. We've been saved, and then we think, boy, this is hard. It's hard being a Christian, and we fantasize our past, and we consider that, hey, when we lived back in sin, things were better. God gets angry with his people, and he asks some questions. How long will they reject me? How long will they not believe me? God says he will disinherit them, which is an incredible tragedy. He promises that even though he disinherits them, he's going to make Moses his very own special people. Well, here Moses again returns to intercession. He's the great prayer model, and he begins to pray just like in Exodus chapter 32. He reminds God of his promises. He reverts back to the very words of God. He appeals to his promises. He begs, pleads for God's mercy and God's forgiveness. And listen, God forgives. He listens to his man whom he favors, and he promises indeed that his glory will dwell upon the earth. God relents of not bringing harm upon his people, but not without giving consequences for their rebellion and for their unbelief. And these two things obviously are very troubling to God: unbelief and rebellion. God accuses the people of testing him 10 times. He accuses them of ignoring his voice and disregarding him. And he accuses them of presumptuous sins, presuming on his nature and character. Caleb, though, has a different spirit. He stands out. God identifies him. He's attracted and drawn to the spirit of this one man, Caleb. Doubt and disobedience. God calls evil along with a complaining and a critical spirit. God highlights these as irritations in his life. God pronounces a judgment on his people, even though he relents on destroying them. The fact is that there are consequences that we bring upon ourselves. Our sins may be forgiven, but we will reap what we have sown. He's not going to kill them, but they're going to reap definite consequences, except for two people, Caleb and Joshua. And they stand out because they dared to obey and dared to trust God. And they went contrary to their own emotions. They came back with the minority report, refused to embrace the majority report, and God is rewarding them for their faith. He accuses the people of the word infidelity, that they've been unfaithful to God, and for suggesting that they and their children will be victims. It is evident that God despises the voicing of your sense of victimized, that you feel as though you've been wronged or you're going to be wrong. And I think from this lesson we learn, don't speak it. Don't confess any of these negative aspects or thoughts that enter our mind. No, we've got to look to God, and we may speak them to him, but we walk and we operate in faith. Complaining has awful, serious consequences. And these people then now have regrets, because God says to them, listen, you're going to be 40 years before you step foot into my promised land. And they begin to regret and consider of reconsiderations of what they're going to. But there comes a point of no return, a line that's been drawn. And here we see the danger of failing instant obedience, that there can, even in our spiritual walk, come a point of which we have gone too far. Psalms 90 is a prayer of Moses. Listen what he does. He says to God, God, you are our dwelling place. And he identifies that the fierceness of God's anger and the fact that it is hot, and he asks God to teach us to number our days and to consider our days, so that we are wise in the use of the time that we have, that we may obtain wisdom from God. And then he says, let the beauty of the Lord be upon us. May we consider to live our lives by hearing his word, reading his word, obeying his word, and refusing to compromise or disobey God. May we not be accused of being disobedient to his mandates.